The wind howled across the barren planet, its icy gusts stirring the jagged rocks and deep craters that marked the landscape. A group of elite intergalactic hunters stood at the edge of a cliff, their high-tech cloaking devices blending them with the harsh environment, making them almost invisible. They had been tracking a dangerous, half-alien bat-like creature for days, a being known as Rathic. It was their most coveted prize, a specimen so rare and powerful that it could bring riches beyond imagination. But this mission was about more than money. Rathic had become a symbol of their superiority, a test of skill and dominance. The creature had once been a part of a peaceful alien race, but years of hunting and manipulation had turned him into a weapon. Rathic was a mix of terrifying alien bat features and humanoid qualities. His wings, once majestic and graceful, were now ragged and torn from years of combat. His sharp claws and enhanced senses made him a deadly adversary. He was a survivor, but he was also marked by a deep sense of betrayal. The hunters were closing in, their advanced technology tracking his every movement. Their eye-guided drones hovered silently above the ground, scanning the area for any sign of the elusive creature. The leader of the group, a tall and imposing figure named Commander Jorik, raised his hand, signaling for the team to stop. His voice, cold and confident, crackled through the comms. "We found him. Prepare to engage." As the hunters advanced cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the rocky ground, Rathic watched from the shadows. His glowing yellow eyes narrowed as he observed his hunters. His pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a growing sense of anger. He knew he was being hunted, but he wasn't going to make it easy for them. With a swift movement, Rathic flapped his wings, rising into the air with astonishing speed. The hunters hadn't anticipated such agility. They scrambled to reposition themselves, but Rathic was already out of their reach. Rathic's wings beat with the strength of a storm, propelling him through the desolate landscape. He could hear the hunters' frantic commands as they tried to track him with their advanced sensors. He dove into a nearby canyon, the dark shadows of the rocks offering brief refuge. His heart pounded in his chest, but he wasn't afraid. He had been in worse situations before. He had fought countless battles, and every time he had survived. But this time felt different. He was different. The memories of his past flooded his mind. The once thriving alien city where he had been born, full of love and peace, had been destroyed by the very beings who now hunted him. His people had been slaughtered, and he had been taken, transformed into a weapon for others to control. But Rathic had escaped. His survival was not by chance, but by his sheer will to live, to fight back. However, his anger had always been a quiet companion, and now it roared inside him like a beast ready to break free. The hunters were closing in. Rathic's wings were growing tired, the wounds from previous battles still fresh. He knew he couldn't keep this up for long, but he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. He had unfinished business, and as much as he loathed the humans who had captured him, he would not let them have the satisfaction of his defeat, not when he still had the strength to fight back. A sudden noise broke his concentration. It was the unmistakable sound of a cloaked vehicle approaching. Rathic froze, his keen senses picking up the vibrations in the ground. The hunters were deploying their most advanced weapon, a heavily armored dropship. The ship's engines hummed softly as it descended toward the canyon. Its cloaking system made it nearly invisible, but Rathic could still feel its presence. He had no choice but to keep moving. His claws scraped the rocky surface as he made his way deeper into the canyon. The shadows grew longer, the silence more oppressive. Rathic pushed forward, using the narrow gaps between the rocks to move silently, his mind calculating his next move. The hunter's presence had become a constant, like a shadow that followed him no matter how far he ran. They were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to capture him. But Rathic had learned the art of survival. He would not make it easy for them. As the dropship hovered above, its lights sweeping the canyon floor, Rathic made his move. With a burst of energy, he launched himself into the air, his wings slicing through the wind like blades. The ship's sensors detected him, and the hunter's voices crackled in his earpiece. "There, he's above us." But Rathik was already gone, darting into a new shadow, vanishing once again from their sight. The story of humanity's rise to a multiplanetary species, once a beacon of hope and triumph, had now turned into a desperate fight for survival. The Zinthar were not just invaders, they were conquerors, and humanity was their next target. As the people of Earth watched helplessly, they understood the true meaning of the message. The stars, once a symbol of infinite possibility, had now become a trap. With the Zinthar descending upon Kepler 186f and Earth's military forces scrambling to protect their colonies, the suspense reached its peak. Every move humanity made seemed to be a step closer to extinction. The invaders, so far ahead in technology, had already begun to tighten their grip on the universe, and the humans had no idea how to fight back. As Earth prepared for war, there was only one question left. Could humanity survive the greatest threat it had ever faced? Or would the Zinthar's deadly march through the stars be the end of humanity's legacy? The battle for survival had only just begun, and the first strike had already been delivered. The invasion began without warning. The Zinthar Collective unleashed a relentless wave of attacks, targeting the colonies that humanity had so carefully built. As soon as they arrived in the skies over Mars, Europa, and Kepler 186f, they deployed their most advanced weapon, cloaking devices that rendered them nearly invisible to any human detection system. The Zinthar were everywhere, but no one could see them until it was too late. The first blow fell on Mars. The colony's communication networks flickered and died as power grids were hacked and destroyed by the Zinthar's digital onslaught. Earth's military satellites, once the pinnacle of human technology, were turned into mere scrap metal, disabled in seconds. Mars, the jewel of humanity's interplanetary expansion, went dark. A few scattered signals from the planet's surface were all that remained, a desperate plea for help before silence consumed it entirely. Europa followed. The research bases, bustling with human scientists studying the icy moon, were suddenly cut off from the rest of the solar system. No one knew why or how. Power failures crippled the station's life support systems, and one by one, communication lines were severed. The beautiful frozen world became a haunting silence, just like Mars. On Earth, the panic escalated. News of the attacks spread like wildfire, but there was no way to fight back. The Zinthar had already disabled the best defenses humanity had ever built. Earth's leaders, once confident in their military might, were now helpless. The alien force was simply too advanced. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened on Kepler 186f. A small group of settlers, led by Commander Evelyn Bonner, were the first to uncover a secret that could change everything. Kepler had once seemed like the perfect next frontier, a world ready for human habitation. Settlements were scattered across its surface, research stations dotting its landscapes, and the future looked bright. But the planet held mysteries, dark secrets buried deep beneath its surface, waiting to be uncovered. Commander Bonner, a seasoned leader and scientist, had led a team to explore an area that had been flagged for possible settlement. The region was known for strange energy readings, and Bonner's team had been tasked with investigating the anomaly. What they found would change the course of the war. As they dug deeper into the planet's surface, the team uncovered an ancient ruin, an enormous structure that looked as though it had been carved by an intelligence far beyond humanity's reach. The ruins were unlike anything they had ever seen before, with strange symbols and writing that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light of their torches. It was a wonder, an enigma, a relic from a time long past. The deeper they ventured, the more unsettling it became. There were signs of decay, of destruction, as if the ruins had been abandoned in a hurry. Pieces of broken technology littered the halls, their purpose unknown. Yet, amid the wreckage, something caught their attention. In the heart of the ruins, they found an artifact, an object that pulsed with a strange energy, unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was an orb, roughly the size of a human head, and it seemed to hum with power. The artifact was connected to a strange mechanism in the floor, and as Bonner carefully approached it, the artifact suddenly activated. A surge of energy shot through the room, and the artifact glowed brighter. For a moment, Bonner felt as though she could hear voices, distant whispers, speaking in a language she couldn't understand. The entire room seemed to vibrate with the power emanating from the artifact. Up in the canopy, Rathik paused, scanning the ground below. The jungle was dense, but the hunters had advanced far enough to see through the trees with their scanning technology. Rathik's heart pounded as he saw the glow of their equipment sweep through the underbrush. They were getting closer. They weren't going to stop until they had him. From the trees, Rathik watched as the hunters moved like shadows, their armor reflecting the faint light from the storm above. They were methodical, precise in their movements, and Rathik knew they were no longer underestimating him. They had learned from their last encounter, and now they were prepared. They weren't just looking for him, they were hunting him. Rathik's breathing slowed as he considered his options. He couldn't outrun them, not with his injuries. The only chance he had was to take them by surprise. The hunters had made one mistake. They had underestimated the terrain. They didn't know the jungle like Rathik did. He had lived here all his life, and he knew the jungle better than they ever could. In a flash of decision, Rathik began to climb higher. His claws found purchase in the rough bark, his body moving with a speed and grace that was almost unnatural. Up higher, he could hear the hunters moving below, their boots hitting the wet ground with heavy thuds. They were close, too close. Rathik took a deep breath, gathering his strength. He couldn't make any mistakes. Suddenly, a piercing crack broke through the air. Rathik froze, his heart skipping a beat. A tree nearby had fallen. The hunters must have triggered it with their movements. They were using heavy, destructive equipment to clear their way through the jungle, and now they had found his position. Rathik's thoughts raced. He could hear them, the clanging of their armor and the sound of their heavy boots crushing the underbrush. He needed to act fast. Without another moment's hesitation, Rathik launched himself from the tree, his claws reaching out as he dived into the darkness below. The hunters didn't see it coming. Rathik's body slammed into one of the hunters with a sickening thud. The shock of the impact sent them both crashing to the ground. Rathik quickly regained his footing, his claws already slashing at the hunter's weapon. The hunter attempted to raise his gun, but Rathik was too fast. He knocked it aside, pushing the hunter to the ground before pouncing on him. A swift strike, and the hunter was down. But the others were coming. Rathik didn't waste a moment. He quickly scanned the area, his eyes darting from one hunter to the next. He had no time to savor his victory. Another hunter appeared from the shadows, his weapon aimed directly at Rathik. The shot rang out, but Rathik was already moving, twisting his body in a way that defied his injuries. The blast missed by inches, and Rathik pounced once again, this time knocking the weapon from the hunter's hands and sending him crashing into the jungle floor. The remaining hunters were now regrouping, realizing their mistake. They were underestimating Rathik once more. He had struck fast, and now they were losing ground. Rathik's eyes flicked to the remaining trees, considering his next move. He couldn't take them all down. Not yet, but he could make them fear him. Rathik backed away slowly, his claws glinting in the faint light. The remaining hunters, visibly shaken, moved into a defensive formation, their weapons raised. Rathik's pulse quickened. He was outnumbered, and they were closing in. But he wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the wind howling louder than ever as the storm raged on. Rathik knew he couldn't fight them all at once, but he would keep them guessing. He would keep them scared. He would make them pay for underestimating him. And so, Rathik melted back into the jungle, his form blending with the shadows. He was not done yet. The hunters thought they had him cornered, but they had no idea who they were really dealing with, and Rathik was going to make them regret their decision to come after him. The fight was far from over. The jungle was alive with sound, but Rathic's mind was dead silent. He moved through the thick undergrowth, his senses heightened, focused solely on one thing: revenge. The hunters had pushed him to the brink before. They had left him to die once, and now they had returned, underestimating him again. But this time, they wouldn't be so lucky. Rathic had learned from the first encounter. Now he was prepared. The tables had turned. Rathic's body ached with every movement. His wings still throbbed from the earlier injury, but the pain no longer mattered. His mind was focused on something far more important: the hunt. The jungle around him, dense and wild, had become his domain, his advantage. The hunters were still out there, and Rathic had learned that they were using advanced tracking technology. They would find him, sooner or later, but he wasn't going to make it easy. He would draw them in, let them think they were getting close, and then he would strike. He slowed his pace as he approached a narrow ravine, one of his favorite spots in the jungle. It was a perfect place to hide, surrounded by towering rocks and thick vines that hung like curtains. Rathic crouched low, his sharp claws digging into the earth. He could hear the hunters in the distance, their movements methodical, their voices low as they communicated. They were closing in. Rathic's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the blood pumping through his veins, the adrenaline coursing through his body. The time had come. He was ready. The hunters had no idea what was about to hit them. As the first of the hunters crept closer, Rathic remained perfectly still. He had done this before, waited for the right moment, when his prey was within range. His eyes were locked onto the hunter, the figure barely visible through the thick foliage. Rathic's muscles tensed, ready to spring. His claws were poised, his wings slightly spread, prepared to launch him into the air in a flash. He could almost hear the hunter's heartbeat, slow and steady, unaware of the danger that was closing in on him. Then, with a swift, powerful movement, Rathic leaped from his hiding spot, landing squarely on the hunter's back. The hunter barely had time to react before Rathic's claws dug into the armor, disabling the hunter's weapon and knocking him to the ground. The other hunters heard the commotion, their heads snapping around in alarm, but Rathic was already moving. He was faster, more agile than they had anticipated. Before they could fire, Rathic was on them. He darted between them, a blur of motion, his claws flashing in the dim light. The hunters tried to react, their weapons aimed, but Rathic was too quick. He slashed at the first hunter's weapon, sending it flying from his hands, and in the same motion, tackled him to the ground. The hunter struggled beneath him, but Rathic's strength was overwhelming. With one swift movement, he disabled the hunter, leaving him unconscious. A second hunter took aim at Rathic, firing a blast of energy. Rathic twisted out of the way, feeling the heat of the blast pass by him, but he was already closing in. The second hunter never had a chance. Rathic's claws found their mark, raking through the armor and incapacitating the hunter in an instant. Rathic didn't pause. He couldn't afford to. The remaining hunters were beginning to regroup. Rathic could hear their frantic orders as they tried to form a defensive line. But Rathic had no intention of letting them get the upper hand. He wasn't just a creature to be hunted. He wasn't a mere victim. He was a force, and he was about to show them just what that meant. He leaped again, higher this time, his wings spreading to give him the lift he needed. As he soared through the air, the last two hunters aimed their weapons. But Rathic was too fast, diving out of their line of fire and landing on a nearby rock. The hunters fired, but their blasts went wide, hitting nothing but air. Rathic snarled, his eyes glowing with fury. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something more. He was fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for the honor they had taken from him, and he would not let them take another step forward. One of the hunters attempted to flank him, moving to the left with a grenade in hand. Rathic saw the movement, his senses alert. He rushed forward, quicker than the hunter could react, and knocked the grenade from his hand, sending it tumbling into the jungle. The explosion rang out, a violent roar that shook the trees around them. The first major test of the weapon came during a daring raid on a Zinthar fleet stationed near Mars. Bonner, leading a squad of elite soldiers, launched a surprise assault. The weapon worked perfectly, taking out several Zinthar warships in a single strike. The human forces cheered in triumph as the alien fleet was thrown into chaos, with warships exploding in the vacuum of space and the once imposing force beginning to retreat. It was a massive victory for humanity. For the first time in the war, the Zinthar had been dealt a blow they couldn't easily recover from. The resistance forces saw it as a turning point, a sign that humanity was capable of standing up to this unstoppable enemy. However, this success came with a terrifying realization. The artifact's power was not as stable as they had hoped. The weapon, powered by the artifact, had begun to malfunction. The energy pulse it emitted was unstable, and every use of the weapon caused it to grow more unpredictable. At first, the instability seemed like a minor issue, something that could be fixed with time. But as the weapon was used more, its instability grew more dangerous. The pulse it emitted began to cause more damage than intended, affecting the very systems humanity had hoped to protect. Ships in orbit, cities on Earth, and even the soldiers using the weapon were at risk of being caught in its destructive wake. The artifact's power, once seen as humanity's salvation, now posed a threat to its very existence. Bonner and the engineers working on the artifact's weaponized form quickly realized the consequences of continuing to use it without fixing the instability. The weapon was volatile, and they could no longer guarantee that it wouldn't spiral out of control. If they didn't find a way to stabilize it, the artifact's power could destroy everything humanity had worked so hard to build. As the weapon's instability grew, the Zinthar made their move. They were not the kind of enemies to retreat in the face of one defeat. The Zinthar responded to the human strike by launching a full-scale invasion. Their massive warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever seen, were headed straight for Earth. It was the beginning of the end. Humanity's last stand against an enemy that had already destroyed so much. The Zinthar warships appeared in Earth's skies like an unstoppable storm, blotting out the sun as they descended toward the planet. Earth's forces scrambled to prepare, knowing that this was their final chance to fight back. The weapon, unstable and unpredictable as it was, could still be their only hope. But using it again meant risking everything. If they activated it in its current state, they might save Earth from destruction, but they could also doom themselves in the process. As the Zinthar's fleet loomed closer, Bonner found herself standing at the heart of the conflict. The fate of humanity rested on her shoulders. She had led her forces through countless battles, and now, as Earth's last line of defense, she was faced with an impossible choice. The weapon could destroy the Zinthar's command ship and possibly turn the tide of the invasion. But if she fired the weapon again, there was a very real chance it would backfire, not just wiping out the Zinthar, but also all of humanity's last remaining hope. In the midst of this chaos, Bonner received word that the Zinthar command ship was within range. This was it. There would be no more chances after this. She stood in the control room, staring at the display of the unstable weapon, her hand hovering over the launch button. Her mind raced as she thought of all the lives lost, of Alden's sacrifice, of the countless soldiers who had given everything to fight for humanity's future. Was it worth risking it all? Was the weapon worth the destruction it might bring? With the Zinthar fleet closing in, the moment of decision came. Bonner could use the weapon, hope that it would strike the Zinthar's command ship and destroy their fleet, or she could retreat and preserve humanity's chance at survival, knowing that without a counterattack, the Zinthar would wipe them out completely. It was a choice no leader should ever have to make. Her mind flashed back to the battlefield on Kepler, to the discovery of the alien ruins, to the artifact's promise. Humanity had reached for the stars, and now they were being pulled back to the darkness. But Bonner couldn't stand by and watch Earth fall without taking a chance. She had always believed that humanity's spirit would carry them through, no matter the odds. And if this was the final chance, she would not hesitate. The man reached into a pouch on his side and pulled out a small device. It emitted a soft glow as he tapped it, and a holographic map appeared in front of him. Rathic's eyes narrowed. The device was sophisticated, clearly designed for more than just navigation. It was a tracker, and it was scanning the jungle for a specific signal. Rathic. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Had the hunters sent this human to find him? To finish the job they had failed to complete? Or was this someone else entirely? Someone with different motives? Rathic's mind raced, but his body stayed frozen in place. If this human was an enemy, he had to be ready. But if he was an ally, then perhaps there was hope. Either way, Rathic couldn't make any mistakes. The human moved forward, the device still glowing in his hand as he advanced into the jungle. His footsteps were light, but deliberate, and there was an air of confidence in his movements. He wasn't afraid of the jungle. He wasn't afraid of what lurked in the shadows. And that made Rathic even more curious. Who was this man? Rathic's heart pounded in his chest as he slowly began to follow the human, keeping a safe distance. His every instinct told him to stay hidden, to wait and watch. The human wasn't aware of him yet, but Rathic had learned that underestimating anyone, human or otherwise, was a dangerous mistake. After several minutes of moving through the dense jungle, the human stopped. Rathic's eyes locked onto him from the shadows. The man was looking directly at him, as though he had known all along Rathic was there. Rathic's instinct screamed to run, to take flight, but something held him in place. The human spoke, his voice calm, but firm. "I know you're out there. I'm not here to fight. I just want to talk." Rathic's mind reeled. How could the human know he was there? He hadn't made a sound. He hadn't been seen. And yet this man seemed completely unfazed, as though he had been expecting this encounter. Slowly, Rathic stepped out of the shadows, his wings flexing slightly as he revealed himself. He wasn't sure what to make of this situation. Was this a trap? A trick? Or was this human telling the truth? The man didn't flinch when he saw Rathic. Instead, he lowered his weapon, a simple but effective energy rifle, and nodded as though recognizing the creature standing before him. "I don't want trouble," he said again, his tone even. "I'm here to help." Rathic's confusion deepened. Help? Why would this human want to help him? A half-alien bat creature, abandoned and left for dead by his own kind. Rathic had never trusted anyone fully, especially not humans. His people had never shown kindness to them. They had viewed them as weak, as inferior. Why would a human offer help now? But there was something in the man's eyes, something genuine, something Rathic hadn't expected to see. Compassion. "I'm not your enemy," the human continued, stepping closer but at a slow pace, as though giving Rathic the space he needed. "I've been tracking the hunters who hurt you. They're part of a larger operation, and you're in danger. I can help you fight back. But you need to trust me." Rathic's mind was a storm of thoughts, confusion, and skepticism battling inside him. He had been betrayed, abandoned, and hunted. Why should he trust this man? But the human didn't seem to be lying. And if he was, Rathic was in no worse position than before. Slowly, cautiously, Rathic nodded. He was tired of running, tired of hiding. Maybe, just maybe, this human could be the ally he needed. Maybe he could help Rathic turn the tide against the hunters once and for all. But he would have to be careful. Trust was something that had to be earned, not freely given. The human smiled, a small but sincere gesture. "Good. We're going to need a plan." And with that, Rathic took the first step toward an alliance that would change everything. The alliance between Rathic and the human had formed quickly, but the trust was something that needed to be built over time. Rathic knew that, and though he remained cautious, a part of him felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The human, who had introduced himself as Jace, was a skilled fighter, far more capable than any ordinary man Rathic had encountered. He had advanced weapons, tactical gear, and knowledge of the enemy that Rathic could only dream of. But what was more important was the determination in his eyes, the resolve to stand against the hunters and protect not just Rathik, but anyone who stood in their way. But there was a catch. The artifact's instability had reached a point where it could not be safely deactivated once activated. The energy pulse would trigger a massive explosion, one that would consume the entire Zinthar fleet. Bonner realized that the only way to ensure the weapon's detonation was to stay behind and make sure it went off. Her team hesitated, but Bonner knew what needed to be done. "I'll stay," she said firmly. "I'll make sure it works. You need to get out of here now." There was no time to argue. The clock was ticking. Bonner quickly activated the artifact, and the core of the Zinthar fleet began to hum with power. The energy was building, rising in intensity. The team members, knowing what Bonner was about to do, exchanged glances filled with sorrow and understanding. They wanted to stay, to fight alongside her, but Bonner's decision was final. "Go," she ordered, her voice steady despite the turmoil around them. "Make sure humanity survives." With heavy hearts, the team retreated, knowing they would never see Bonner again. As they made their way out, Bonner stayed behind, standing alone in the heart of the enemy fleet. The artifact's power surged, and Bonner braced herself for the final moments. The countdown had begun, and there was no way to stop it. With a final look at the approaching destruction, Bonner whispered to herself, "For humanity, for Earth." And then, in a brilliant flash of light, the artifact detonated. The energy pulse exploded outward, tearing through the Zinthar fleet with devastating force. The warships disintegrated, their massive forms reduced to nothing in the wake of the explosion. The Zinthar, once so powerful, were wiped out in an instant. The survivors watched in awe as the Zinthar fleet vanished in a blaze of destruction. The weapon had worked, but at a terrible cost. Bonner had given her life to ensure that humanity would have a future. Her sacrifice had made the difference, and the Zinthar were no more. On Earth, the news of the victory spread quickly. Humanity had won. The Zinthar were gone, and the war was over. But the joy of victory was tempered by the deep sorrow of losing Bonner. Her sacrifice would forever be remembered as the moment when humanity stood strong in the face of impossible odds. Bonner's final words, "For humanity, for Earth," became a rallying cry, a symbol of the resilience and courage that defined humanity. Her death was not in vain. The human race had survived, and it would continue to reach for the stars, just as Bonner had always believed. As the survivors looked up at the sky, they knew that Bonner's sacrifice would never be forgotten. The Zinthar had been defeated, but the spirit of humanity, forged in the fires of war, would live on forever. The victory was hard-won. The Zinthar had been defeated, but the cost was staggering. Humanity, once proud and powerful, now found itself scattered and broken, with most of its colonies lying in ruins. Cities that had once thrived on Mars, Europa, and Kepler were nothing more than smoldering ashes. The Zinthar's relentless assault had destroyed much, leaving behind only the remnants of a once great civilization. Survivors were few, and the sense of loss hung heavy over the human race. Entire families had been wiped out, entire cities reduced to dust. The war had taken its toll, not just in lives, but in the very spirit of humanity. The battle had been fought, and the Zinthar were no more, but at what cost? There was no celebration, no joy, only the heavy burden of rebuilding and the scars of war. But even in the face of such devastation, there was something more powerful than sorrow: resilience. Humanity had endured. Despite the overwhelming odds, they had fought back, driven by the will to survive and the need to protect their future. Bonner's sacrifice had made it possible for the human race to continue, and it had inspired a new sense of unity among the survivors. The world, though broken, had not given up. As the survivors began the long, arduous task of rebuilding, there was a realization that humanity's future would not be the same. The old ways of expansion, of blindly reaching for the stars, could no longer be the way forward. The Zinthar had shown them the dangers of unchecked ambition, the cost of overreaching into the unknown. Humanity could not continue its rapid expansion without understanding the risks that came with it. The galaxy was vast, and there were forces out there that could destroy them if they were not careful. Yet there was also hope, hope in the face of destruction. Hope that humanity could rise from the ashes, stronger and wiser than before. The survivors knew that the fight against the Zinthar had been a turning point, but it was not the end. It was only the beginning of a new era, a time to rebuild, to grow, and to explore once more. But this time, they would do so with caution, with respect for the dangers that lay in the unknown. On Earth, the leaders of the surviving human nations gathered to discuss the future. There were no grand speeches, no promises of glory, only the quiet, somber recognition of the challenges ahead. They had secured their place in the galaxy, but the price had been high. The war was over, but the consequences would last for generations to come. Humanity had to rebuild not just its cities and infrastructure, but its very way of thinking. They had learned hard lessons from their conflict with the Zinthar, and now they had to use those lessons to guide their future. In the heart of the surviving human colonies, a memorial was built in Bonner's honor, a monument to the bravery and sacrifice of the soldiers who had fought and died for the future of humanity. Bonner's name was etched into the stone, her face immortalized in the hearts and minds of those who had survived. The memorial stood tall, a symbol of the strength and resilience that defined humanity. It reminded everyone that even in the darkest times, there was always a glimmer of hope. As the days passed and the survivors began to rebuild, a sense of purpose began to take root. The leaders of Earth spoke of a new era of cooperation, of peaceful exploration and careful expansion. Humanity would no longer rush headlong into the unknown without considering the consequences. They would explore the galaxy, but with caution, and always with an eye on the dangers that lay beyond their reach. The lessons learned from the war would shape humanity's future. They had proven that, despite their weaknesses, they could rise to face the greatest threats the universe had to offer. They had defeated the Zinthar, an alien force far more advanced and dangerous than they had ever imagined. And in doing so, they had proven something even more important, that they could survive. The final scene is set on Earth, as the leaders stand together, gazing up at the stars. The sky, once filled with the threat of the Zinthar, now holds only the promise of the future. They know that their place in the galaxy has been secured, but it has come at a cost. The memory of the war, the loss of so many, and the sacrifice of heroes like Bonner would forever be etched into their hearts. The stars, once a symbol of ambition, now symbolize something more: survival, resilience, and hope. As the camera pans upward, the vastness of space stretches out before them. The survivors, though scared, stand tall. Humanity's spirit has been tested, but it has not broken. They have proven themselves worthy of the stars, and they have earned their place among the cosmos. But the galaxy is still a dangerous place, and the Zinthar may not be the last enemy they face. They know this, but they are ready to face whatever comes next, with the same courage and determination that carried them through the darkest days of the war. The final shot is of the stars, shimmering brightly in the distance. Humanity may have been knocked down, but they were not defeated. They had risen, and they would continue to rise. The war against the Zinthar was over, but humanity's journey was just beginning. With the lessons of the past and the legacy of their survival, humanity would face the future with hope, determination, and the knowledge that they could overcome any challenge that lay ahead. The credits roll, but the message is clear: humanity is not done yet. The story may have ended, but the future is full of possibilities. And as long as there are stars in the sky, humanity will continue to reach for them.